Morning. So thanks to the guys at Virtue for inviting me. Although I think it was through Fujitsu, wasn't it, Dan, that actually landed on my desk. So we titled this Microsoft Futures, but in reality, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is already available there, with one or two exceptions. And it's more about what you could actually do with this stuff that's been around. As a bit of background for myself, I've been doing this job for nearly 11 years, and prior to that, I was a technical architect with another partner around the country. So I've been kind of doing this stuff for a while, and it can be interesting and whatever else. Now, some of the slides here are, in all intents and purposes, I spend a lot of my time talking to what I would call the corporate customers rather than in education like yourselves. However, some of the messages that we give out are very much pertinent regardless of your sector or industry or whatever else. And what we tend to see is a lot of this stuff around, what drives a business. Many schools are no longer just education pieces anymore. My own wife works as a HR, and she is pulling together a 4-school Met. Okay, and I understand some of the challenges that she's got there, and it's so in effect schools are becoming businesses and need to be run as that, their budgets and everything else. Some of the scenarios around, I'm sure somebody's come across the apprenticeship schemes and the effect that the government said if your organisation is over a 3 million turnover or something like that, you get a significant contribution to put in there. There's quite a lot of schools that actually meet that benchmark. And I don't think they really thought about it. I think when they thought about those things, actually it was a case of it's large corporates that it was going to affect. It's not. It's kind of, so those are the sort of things. So this idea of business changes and the tensions that are there are important even in education. From your perspective, looking at kind of the IT infrastructures that you have, what you also want to do, and you alluded to it, where's it going? Phil alluded to it, was things are changing. It's no longer that nice central piece where you've got control and you understand all the boundaries. Things are moving. It's no longer a desktop that's nailed to a table. These things move, and we have to take care of that. So we also want to keep that stable and predictable. So there's this old buzzword around, transformation. That can mean a lot of things to different people. So that's what I meant to do. Sorry, there we go. Transformation. So that's important, and a lot of businesses, regardless of your sector, you will need to transform in one way or another. Okay, whatever that means. So going back to, here's my slide for Phil's view of do I go to cloud or not, as the case may be. This is probably the best one I could do. You could kind of go, head up over the cliff, or you can kind of stay the course on the road. Okay, so the key thing here is, right, I suppose coming back to a bit commented, cloud is right in a right scenario. It's not the all and end all. So there are scenarios where it is, and I mentioned things like Google Docs, there's Microsoft Classroom, there's all sorts of things like that, or even Office 365. There are cloud-based applications which are important. Whether you go there now or in the future, it's probably something that you will need to look at. We do not expect, and certainly the experience that I have of talking to customers is, they are not going to go all whole hog, lift and shift, and go straight over there to sort everything on cloud. This idea of on-premise infrastructure and managing that is going to stay around for a while. Okay, that's just the way it is. And you need to choose, in essence, what elements of that are right for you. So keep that in mind. In fact, the next slide kind of jumping ahead of myself, is that you have this traditional model of on-premise dedicated servers. I mean, back in what was it now, 15 odd or more years ago, we were deploying servers per application. An application was assigned to a server. The fact it sat at about 5% utilization was regardless. Okay, that's just how we did stuff. Over time, you have to kind of think about that and benefit. Actually, I want to make better use of that piece of hardware. I start to stack applications on there, and I, trying to get more benefit from it. Then we get to this more modern view of this, of actually trying to abstract those applications away from the roots of the ties in that infrastructure and those servers, and actually think more about cloud-based stuff. Right? Okay. Think about this. This isn't just about cloud's more of a destination, or a journey to it. It's not really somewhere else. I have to move from A to B. So I have to think about that. There are scenarios where it's important. Some of these may be important to you, some maybe not. I'll give an example on this cloud-based model one, and this is something that a school in Birmingham did, Shoot Hill School. There's a a project that I put together with archiving photographs from around Birmingham. And basically what it is I don't know, several thousand photographs, and using technology like Deep Zoom, which is effectively a cloud-based application, they can actually have just this massive menage of photographs, and you can click through on them and it brings it out and shows some of the history of Birmingham. So that's some really good stuff that some of those schools have done. But then you kind of get to more fancy stuff. So what do we do, and what does Microsoft offer with regards to kind of that cloud model? And this is kind of Azure. Now, how many people have looked at Azure? Not Office 365, what have you looked at from Azure or cloud-based? Has anybody looked at it at all? I expect you to have looked at it. Okay? So, yeah?
Yeah.
The price.
And the price.
Yeah, we're not going to get into price, and I'm going to try to avoid
Steal my thunder!
So,
Stealing thunder!
we had an interesting dynamic. We'll pick up on this conversation when we do.
The stage, by the way.
Yeah, of course it was. Yeah, he'll pay you the $5 later. So essentially, yeah. But actually, if you look at it, don't even try and read the slide. Right. The point of the slide is that Azure offers a hell of a lot of bits of technology and infrastructure, and whether or not, I mean, Phil, you mentioned IoT and Internet of Things. I mean, that's one of those massive areas where we're starting to see things, like fridges that are able to order the food for themselves and all sorts of fancy stuff like that. But all of these or how many of you use Uber and things like that? These are the types of applications that are becoming more and more prevalent now that we have these types of devices. Okay, it doesn't matter whether this is a Samsung, an Android, whether it's an Apple, or whether it's a Windows phone. We all carry one at least, right? So the applications are important, but they are actually cloud-based apps. The key here is there's a lot of this stuff. Some of it you won't even use, but there might be elements that are actually useful for you, thinking about some of your elements. So this is kind of my point here, is that when you look at what you're doing from a strategic point of view, is that do I continue to maintain the status quo, do the way things I've done, always done it, or can we maybe advance a little bit more and actually use some of the technologies that are up there? Now, I put the next slide in just purely on the basis of, and I'm cognizant of the fact that this is a global map, but just as and rather than being parochial, key thing that I want to mention here, and probably most important for a lot of people, both in the UK, is the introduction of these two data centres. Okay, so this is always the challenge where, I am an Irish passport holder, proud and everything else, so sticking stuff in Dublin, I'm kind of cool with that, okay? However, when we look at public sector, there's a lot of data that's carried there, and actually we want to maintain data sovereignty and keep it on the island, yeah? So having these two data centres makes a big thing here, and obviously then off the back of that, we want to think about things like our certifications. So, GovCloud. So, in essence, what it means is, going back to your point about the data now can be anywhere, if we start to look at applications and where the data is stored, if it's in an Azure data center, it's probably as secure, if not more secure, than in a hosted or even in your own environment. Okay? And this is something that we've seen from a lot of organizations. We've all seen the papers of, leakages, etc., etc. So, if you're thinking about your data and where data could potentially be stored, even in a public cloud data center, it's probably as secure. Okay? So that's just one of those things. This is one of those areas where I was going to mention about sort of the futures pieces. And this is like taking some of that technology that we have in Azure and actually bringing it down and putting it in your own data centers. And this is where the likes of Fujitsu and others are starting to look at this sort of thing. And essentially, you don't need to take this and go into the public cloud. In actual fact, we're starting to bring to market this idea of that capability, but it sits on premise. So if you want to benefit from some of those things, that you can do. There are some caveats around it about the services that are there. But in essence, the biggest one that we start to see is this here around infrastructure service. You're all probably running some sort of virtual machine platform, okay, for your server estate. Nobody's doing servers for individual projects anymore. At least they shouldn't be anyway. They should be making the most out of the infrastructure. The key thing about Azure Stack, and where it can help a lot of people, is it's consistent. So if you actually start to develop some applications or run some infrastructure on premise on Azure Stack, you can effectively move them between Azure. I call it Azure. There's so many different pronunciations. If we all went around the table, we'd have all our own music. I've heard it from Azure, Azure. there's a whole lot of other things that I've come across.
But you don't call it blue.
No. Or big either.
But that's the point.
And essentially, you know, it is one of those things that'll hit this market. And the thing about it is, and it's not overly complicated per se, is how it gets deployed. It's going to be an appliance. So it's a plug-and-play type scenario. And we have 3 main vendors, with 4th on the way and more following along once we go GA. So that's the key. It's kind of more key. If you want that technology, it's a bit of plug-and-play. Okay, so some really good stuff there around that. But going back to my road and what you do you stay the course and follow on? So with Windows Server, especially 2016 that we released last year, I'm kind of regretting the next slide now anyway. What we did and what the product team did was basically take a lot of the technologies that we have in Azure and actually try and bring some of them down there. And we were talking about some of these a little bit earlier. And a lot of the focus is, in fact, I'll probably go to skip the next slide. And I'll go straight to this one. It's around sort of a number of things we wanted to look at. We're around security, identity specifically, and then securing the platform, plus looking at applications. But what I also wanted to bring out here is a couple of things. We're all familiar with the idea of standard data center versions of Windows Server. But did you know there are a few others? There's Essentials. This one's quite interesting, especially in academia, the multi-point server. So it's almost like it's like RDS, but it's not quite RDS. But essentially, it gives you that the use there. And then we kind of get down into here, we've got storage server, and then obviously the free hypervisor layer. So there's a lot of different options there with regards to that. Yes, when you get up to these 2 big fellas up here, this is where we put all of the focus on, where we put most of the, you know, the drive into the, you know, the features and functions and various elements in there. But essentially, there's plenty of options that you have available. We've also introduced a new kind of kit into the block. This is an interesting one because we got a lot of feedback by saying, and actually no, I'll ask a question on the table. How many of you were running sort of Windows Server maybe 2008, 2012? Yeah? Yeah? How big are your images, roughly, if you think about them? If you were to create it as a virtual machine?
Well, we normally provision at 40 gigs.
Yeah.
They normally run between 20 and 25.
Yeah, so if you start a minimum, I reckon start a minimum of 12 to 13 gig, and then once you add some stuff on top of it, it gets right. Okay, so it's a big chunk of disk space. Yeah?
Yeah, well, Dan likes that.
I know Dan likes that, but then you end up buying things with technologies that have got dedupe and all sorts of funky stuff. Actually, right? Okay, no, that's cool. You know. Anyway, so in 2016. And I'll get to Nano in a second. We did 2 things with it. So we got, you know, we brought the, and actually the other question is, how many of you are actually running or have tried to run Windows Core?
Probably.
Yay.
No, it is. Compared to Nano.
Well, no, leave that out of the question for a minute. Why is the question I'm going to ask you. Why are you not thinking about Windows Core?
Can I answer that? It's not real. It's meant to be a cut-down version of Windows.
No, it's not.
It's just the GUIs.
It removes the GUI. So you see, this is the thing is, we've grown up with this, with a full UI, being able to mouse click and do all sorts of fancy stuff. But in actual fact, for some of the workloads, we don't actually need to do that. And what we end up doing is going to your 25, 40 gig space of disk. We're using up a lot of stuff we don't actually need to use. Okay? Yeah? You agree with me on that one?
Yeah.
Leave that out of the equation for a minute. But essentially, that's the thing, right? So you know, you can actually. So there are benefits not just from a disk space perspective, but also from a security perspective. Okay, and patching and things like that. So what we actually, so this is, you know, we were recommending customers who are starting to deploy. And if I pick on something like Active Directory or DNS, for example, don't deploy it up with this, because 90% of the time you sat at your workstation, use remote management tools to, you know, use AD, you know, using computers or whatever else, right? So why do you need a UI sitting on the AD controller? You don't.
When it breaks.
Well, when it breaks. So do you think the UI is going to help you when it breaks?
Looks better.
Sorry for my exasperation, but if it breaks, it'll break in either of those, okay? The difference is you have a significant benefit of going down this. I'm not saying go wholeheartedly here. Look at that, because 9 times out of 10 you will be sitting at your desk and that's where you'll manage this environment from, okay? The benefit here is that you have a smaller image, your actual security footprint, or I keep forgetting the right word for this. Essentially, it's a little bit easier and less to manage. So the key thing here is less updates, less reboots, less patches. Those are the sort of things to think about. Okay.
I'll give you another big, it's a big one. So forget down this storage, it's really cheap.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it matter, but when you're looking at public or private cloud hosted service, there is a big cost to storage. So stripping that down is a bigger.
Yeah, talking to a lot of you guys about hosting a domain controller in your cloud with us at the moment. That's a great use case, isn't it? It's going to be use less resources, it's going to cost less risk, less maintenance. It's an ideal scenario, actually.
Yeah, it is, and it's you know, half the time. I mean, I've got to admit, right? So when 2012 R2 came out with Server Core, I avoided this. Okay, I grew up with GUI, so it was easy, right? Okay, until we actually got a sorry, Dan, a Nutanix box. Okay, hang on. Okay. Yeah, I know, but hey, I'm vendor neutral when it comes to hardware, right? The thing about it was, it came as Server 2012 R2 with 4 core installations. To manage it, I had to learn how to use core. Simple. Okay? But that's where I started to see more of the benefits of it, because at the end of the day, I was using remote management to it anyway. So, didn't need this stuff. What I do want to mention here is, and there's a big difference between Server 2012 and 2016, is that in 2012, if you deployed this and then you got too scared, we gave you an option with a PowerShell commandlet to basically turn that back on. Okay? So in 2016, we've removed that capability. Okay? So there is no backdoor out of it. Okay? So you kind of go down. So the point is, if you deploy an Active Directory, they deploy this core, you know, that's it. If you want to redo it, you have to redo the DC. Okay? Now, getting to the point where I was going to is around the little kid on the block, right? So one of the things we want to do is actually, if you start to see this from, you know, you mentioned 20 to 25 plus gig. These ones will start somewhere between 6 to 10 on average. This little fella, when deployed initially, you're looking at 450 meg.
See you, Dan. I've got a USB key.
Oh, hang on. No, because right. So here, no, don't. This is where I'm going to do you a favor, right? There are certain roles that NanoServer has been built for. AD isn't one of them, right? Hyper-V is one. Failover clustering is another. Scale out file server. DNS, IIS. Okay. So if you think of it from a hypervisor, I can run a very efficient hypervisor here, which leaves me all this storage for my VMs. Yeah? So I'm getting the benefit from that. And so you can kind of, again, the actual OS footprint is significantly less, so you have you get more bang for your buck.
Basically do what VMware does. Yes,
and that's exactly where it kind of came from. You know, we were driven around that route because why haven't you got ESX? That's why we started to bring out sort of Hyper-V server or server Hyper-V, whichever it was. And then, but this one is a little bit more important because it gives that, you know, it gives us the ability to develop modern applications around .NET, but it gives us containerization, but at the same time, it gives us some core fundamental infrastructure components that we can deal with. Which basically means then we can still sit all of these big fat VMs on top of this without losing a lot of the underlying bit space, right? So, thinking about those, so that's quite a useful thing, and effectively you can deploy it as a on the physical 10 or as a virtual machine. It is slightly different. So on the next slide, which we talk about, Scott, one of the key differences with regards to updates. I've been around long enough that doing patching is a painful exercise, right? For whatever reason, we've all done that, right? The key thing that we wanted to do, and what the people above my pay grade decided to do, was essentially make it more predictable. Patch Tuesday's been around a long time, okay? But what they want to do is say, instead of shipping out X number of updates on, 3rd of March, say in a couple of weeks, right? They've decided, actually, you know what, we'll send 2 out for March. Security patch or a security update and a roll-up, okay? So what that means is it's more predictable. You know you're only going to have to deal with 2 updates. Okay, and that's all you'll have to deploy. That does not dismiss your process for looking at what's contained within those updates. So doing your, looking up at the bulletin IDs, is it applicable, blah, 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 and then the usual thing, test, 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 and test again. Okay? So they still, but the key thing is, over a course of a year, you'll have a lot less updates to think about and push out, and they'll be more frequent. Sorry, not more frequent. They'll be more manageable, less of them there to deal with. The other thing to think about on here as well is that in Service 16, actually, the Windows Update is set to download but not install. So the content can be set there if you allow it to do that. The other key thing on this, and this is linking to Nano Server, is LTSB stands for Long-Term Servicing Branch. So it's something we had the conversations, right? Okay, how many of you in the past waited until the first service pack came out before you deployed? God, there's more of you going to have to admit to that. Yeah, those days are gone. Okay, there won't be a concept of a service pack anymore. We will do these cumulative updates along the way. So the long-term servicing branch, and we will deal with those, and that's the kind of scenario, is that we will just add those updates. So if the LTSB adds for server core and server or the desktop experience. Nano is different. So those of you that have deployed Windows 10 were probably familiar with the concept of current branch for business, where you have an update usually every quarter. 6 months there, but it depends on the shipment, okay? So you will have that almost like, although not to the same extreme, those of us that have iPads in the house, and that includes me, they'll push out the latest update and then I can choose to install it. So in current branch for business is a similar type of servicing model where an update will get released and you then choose to deploy it as appropriate. There are some caveats there in that you cannot be beyond N-2 before you fall out of support. Okay, so there's some things there. So Nano will follow the very same approach like that. So an update will be available. You get to choose when to install it, and away you go. Okay, so that kind of talks about the server piece. Does anyone want to ask any questions, or should we just hold until we do the whole talk, chit chat, whatever?
Looking forward to it.
So the other thing is, and this is kind of more going down into the devices space and looking at Windows Intune. And this was the best picture I could find with some students. So,
I'm guessing this won't take long.
Hey?
I'm guessing this won't take long.
Intune? No. How many people know what Intune is? A few of you, yeah. So, historically, actually, no, forget about that, sorry. In the end, Intune is about managing the kind of the devices and users to a point. Okay, and essentially where Intune has sort of moved, it kind of started here, but then we started to add the things around mobile device management. And the primary reason for that is that we all started to carry these things, and then we get them as kind of corporate devices, and then we started to use them for my work email, my personal email, So we had to be able to manage them. And more recently, what we started to go is thinking about application management. The reason for that is, so rather than thinking, traditionally we thought about managing the device. The device doesn't move, or in the past, or it was, we want to make sure where it is, and etc., etc. But more often than not, and this comes back to your point, Phil, about data, where data lives. Data could live on this. In fact, my data lives on that, the one that sits on my desk, yeah, and it sits in the cloud. When I'm thinking about this from an organizational perspective, I want to protect the data, not necessarily the device, and that's why we have things, things like BitLocker on here for in my case, and when you get to other levels of encryption on devices. So the idea of application management means, can we ring fence, I'll call them corporate applications, and the data they contain. So that if I have this scenario, how many of you considered something like a bring your own device type scenario? Yeah? So you could, if I got my colleagues who talk about this a lot, they'll talk about, you're losing your laptop in a taxi or whatever else on a Friday night, and then you go down to PC World or Curry's in the morning, you buy a new laptop and you build it up and away you go. Okay? The reason for that is because it's the data that's important, not the device. Yeah? So then Intune kind of helps us along those bases. So it breaks it down into 2 bits. Is kind of the MDM piece, managing the device itself, enrolling the device and managing, so I can do the whole, wipe, remote wipe, etc. when the device is lost. We can start to look at clever stuff down around this side of things, you know, with you know, if you're using kind of iPhone devices, you know, if they've been jailbroken, actually put policies in place that if it's jailbroken, it just cannot be managed or wiped, etc. And things about the ring fencing piece when it gets to kind of the management bit is more about, if I ring fence the data, what it means is that if the user leaves the organization for whatever reason, I can wipe just that data, so you don't, you know, kill all their Facebook photographs or whatever else at the same time, and then they kind of become more disgruntled than they probably already are. So that kind of deals with the Intune piece, and it basically, wrapping it all up together, it kind of manages the whole the devices and the users, but it changes slightly the view: do I manage the device or the applications, or can I do both? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Are there any questions? Or a stunned silence?
Are you not carrying on Windows 10 or anything? Or?
I wasn't going to carry out anything specifically around Windows 10. But the only slide, actually, that was the last slide I was going to do, was this actual slide around. This is building around the whole Windows 10 piece to a certain extent, and looking at the. Oops, go back up. Looking at the. It's a fancy word for sensor fabric. But this is looking at a variety of different things. So starting to look at malware detection using advanced threat analytics and advanced threat stuff. You've got Active Directory, ADFS. ATA is advanced threat analytics, so it's looking at behavioral stuff about where people normally would be accessing a device, and if they move somewhere else in 20 minutes they shouldn't be really there. So there's lots of stuff in around that. And on that note, I shall leave it there.